What's up, YouTube? It's your boy Jersey coming at you with another reaction video, and today we are going to react to Trevor Bauer video, and it's called "Did MLB Change the Baseball?" Let's go. Let's get right into it.
That's it?
So that's what we had. We definitely ran over about an hour.
We ran over about
About
what we
half an hour.
projected, about half hour. So if you do want to spend and ask some questions, go for it. Sorry we ran over a little bit. We were going to allot a little bit more time for questions, but for question and answer.
Answering some.
Anybody got any
questions.
specific questions or any?
All right, let's go.
Go for it.
That pitching algorithm that you were talking about,
Speak loudly.
the pitching algorithm that you were talking about, does that have any kind of a random component to select pitches, like to combat hitters making adjustments, or is that all based off of like data-driven?
Yep. It doesn't right now. What it's looking at right now is what actually happened and probabilities of, based on what actually happened, of what will happen. That's definitely a plan for the future, though, is to randomize things. But what you find is,
Love his videos.
in the case
man.
of
Love it.
this chart, you can see there's quite a few locations that I can throw sinkers or different pitch types that are all pretty good. And what it'll end up doing is giving you a suggested pitch based on throwing it to those locations, but also keeping your overall pitch distributions in those counts as even as possible. One of the ways hitters combat
Good
this is they'll look
information,
at,
man.
okay, in 3-0 counts, he throws a fastball 90% of the time. So if I get the green light in 3-0, I'm swinging fastball. I don't care if I swing and miss and look stupid on a slider in the dirt, because 90% of the time
I
I
like
have a really
that.
good chance to do damage. And what you find with starters that have two really good pitches and one kind of pitch is they'll struggle the third time through the order, or they'll struggle
true.
the second or third time they face a team, because hitters pick up
That's
on those
true.
tendencies.
Oh my!
and
They should
they
be
can
writing
exploit
this
them.
down.
So in an ideal world, you would throw each of your pitches the exact same amount in every count. Maybe not the exact same amount. Maybe you'd throw fastballs more often than you'd throw cutters. But you'd throw cutters 15% of the time in every single count. You'd throw fastballs 40% of the time in every single count. Those are just arbitrary numbers.
I like
but
this angle.
yes, in the future it will account for some sort of randomness to keep the hitter off of
Good
the
question.
tendency.
Do you think the pitch selection algorithms will be so good to the point where pitchers and catchers won't even make the call?
It's a great question.
I like
At
that.
some point, probably. But one of the great things about baseball is that
True.
you still have humans playing the game. And in the case of, like I mentioned earlier, when I threw a curveball that was probably the best location to throw it in that count, it still got hit. I'd love to see a game in spring training or sometime called completely based on the algorithm. But in a sense, it doesn't really matter, because a pitcher will never be able to execute perfectly, and there'll still be holes and mistakes made, and there'll still be ways for hitters to pick out which mistakes they're going to
that's
hit
true.
or swing at and target.
Wow.
So no matter how good you get your algorithm and how optimized it is, it's still a human game.
Does the algorithm that you're using here have the ability to account for like the sequencing of the pitches that you
Interesting.
Yeah, pitch sequencing. If everyone can hear that, does the algorithm I'm using have the ability to account for the sequence of the pitches? No, right now it doesn't. We're not sure right now, as it stands, if pitch sequencing matters from a purely data
Yo, that would be
perspective. There hasn't
crazy
been
if
any
that do
real good
that.
way to show that it does or doesn't
Pitch
matter.
sequence?
From an experiential standpoint, being on the mound, it absolutely matters. And so that's one of the holes in the data right now is looking at, how do you quantify that? How do you account for something that pitchers will all tell you that matters, but the data doesn't necessarily show it.
So when we were looking at the hitter vision, right? So what you start doing is you start doing this. So you're taking cutters and you're measuring them about, okay, if the guy's looking for a fastball and you throw a cutter, what does a cutter look like to him, right? So then you start breaking it down into even smaller subsets. So you say, give me all fastballs that were thrown after a cutter, but the cutter was a strike, and then show me what the vision looks like, right? And show me what hitters are actually swinging at or not. Because if they just saw a cutter and it was a ball, and now you throw a fastball and it comes out of the same basic window or tunnel or whatever you want to call it, and he thinks it's a cutter, then he should probably be taking it because he said, no, that's a ball. I ain't got to swing at that. Whack, up, right? So then you should see, in a sequencing standpoint, a lot of balls showing up when you start actually looking at the sequencing. And the whole thing of that we showed you with the strike zones and stuff, that's really where that's going. It's about sequencing. Because no pitch exists in a vacuum except an 0-0 pitch. Every pitch has the pitch before it, and it influences the pitch after it. So that's a huge area that analytically needs somebody to figure out how to get at that information.
And the main problem with it so far is that no one has been able to look at what a hitter's actually seeing and make intuitive decisions on, does this make sense or does it not? Generally, they look at all fastballs following a slider. Well, the swinging strike rate is the same, so clearly sequencing doesn't matter. And it's just an incomplete answer, kind of a bad paradigm to think about it, but the best that we've had up until this point. So that's definitely a huge area of exploration.
Just spin rate wise, I know you've talked about using illegal substances or sticky substances to affect it. Have you looked at any of I guess the biomechanics behind finger mobility or wrist mobility or anything like that to actually affect spin rate?
Yeah, so I've been chasing this since 2012. I was the first person to buy the first consumer to buy a TrackMan unit back in 2012. I actually have 3 or 4 of them sitting in my garage because none of them worked, and I didn't want to send them back, and so it's kind of a war that went on between TrackMan and I. But once you can measure something, you can start trying to influence it. And what we found on breaking pitches and changeups and stuff like that, there are certain ways that you can affect it. Tension on the ball helps. If you just think about the Newtonian physics of how friction and how a ball would spin, the more friction you can generate, the faster you can spin it. The more tangentially you apply the force, the faster it's going to spin, etc. So on breaking pitches and changeups, basically anything non-fastball, I've found certain ways to influence it with tension, with ball deeper in the hand or on the fingertips, increased perceived rate of pronation or not, stuff like that. There hasn't been a ton done on the actual biomechanics of the fingers, like how stiff your fingers are, how long they are, everything that has.
We tried.
Yeah, we tried.
So he has this 3D printer, right? So I told him, print me some splints that go over the backside of the finger, because if you watch it on high-speed video, the fingers start bent like this around the ball, but as the ball starts kind of release, they straighten up, right? So I says, okay, let's not bend the fingers. Let's see what happens. So we printed these 3D splints to go on the back of the fingers, so when you throw it, your fingers had to stay like that instead of straightening out like that to see if it really influenced.
What do you think? Spin rate go up or down? Or stay the same? Yeah, down. So then the thought was, okay, let's have more flexion in the fingers, right? So we taped emery boards to the back of the fingers so that they would stay straight. So you would get this kind of rolling effect, right? Spin rate go up or down?
Down.
Down.
This is why I'm not there.
Basically, everything we've tested, and we've tested a lot of it on fastballs, has either been neutral or down.
Except for sticky stuff.
And
sticky stuff has this interesting property. It adheres to the ball. So the fingers stay on the ball if you actually look at it at 5,000 frames a second from the side with some lasers to see when it, all this stuff, right? It's pretty involved. Anyway, beyond that. So it stays on, the ball stays on the fingers slightly longer, all right? So when the ball exits the fingers, the force is more tangential. And so you get more tangential force, then the force spins it faster.
And there doesn't seem to be any way. So when you look at it, we set up a camera from the side at 5,000, anywhere between 5 and 10,000 frames per second. And so you see the hand kind of passing, let's see, for you guys, you would see it kind of passing through the frame this way. And here's the ball. So the fingers would press through the center of mass, and the ball kind of like be pushed off the fingers. But with sticky stuff, it would actually get to this point, some angle, where the fingers are actually pulling on the backside of the ball. And we really think that that is the reason why the spin rate jumps, not necessarily all because of the friction due to the sticky substance. But there doesn't seem to be any way to actually get the fingers to that position without sticky stuff to test the theory.
A little side story, I'll make it quick. But anyway, so sticky stuff is interesting because what you find out is when it leaves the fingers, you can hear a pop. Okay, if it's good sticky stuff, right? And there's lots of good sticky stuff. They have their own things that they cook up where they boil this and they add Diet Coke and they do this and that, right? You know, they have all their own little formulas, right? Anyway, but if it's good sticky stuff, you'll hear a pop when it leaves the fingers. Because literally, the sticky stuff is either pulling your skin off and it's going with the ball, or it's pulling the leather off the ball and it's sticking to your fingers. That's what it comes down to, right? So you'll hear reporters that obviously, you know, don't know much about this, right? So they'll be saying in spring training, oh, he was throwing so hard you could literally hear a pop coming off his fingers as he spun the ball, right? And it's like, oh, he's throwing so hard. And it's like, no, not quite. What you're seeing is a cheater out there throwing sticky stuff.
Yep. Telltale.
But it's a loud pop. You can hear it. You can hear the adhesion breaking.
So a lot of stuff has been said recently about like the drag coefficient on the ball as it became home runs. Does that affect you guys a lot as you're working on your pitch designs and your pitch kits?
Minimally, but the ball's in the air for such a short period of time that the overall effect of it is so much smaller. A home run might be in the air 8, 10 seconds, some shorter, 5, 6 seconds, but a pitch may be only in the air for 0.35 or 0.5 seconds. So it does affect it. It doesn't affect it nearly as much as home runs. So this the ball was, to me, it felt slightly smaller. Slightly harder. The leather was smooth. It used to be before, if you had, you know, if you grew your fingernails out a little bit and you kind of scored the ball, you could cut a little flap into it. Or if you took your fingernail and kind of drug it along the leather, you could see little abrasions happen in the leather. That wasn't possible this year. If you drug your fingernail along it, it would just kind of create a little trench in the ball, but there would be no break in the leather. The seams were narrower, so there was less, I guess, airy space between the two pieces of leather. And because of that, the seams were a little bit lower. It's very slight, but if, for someone who does that for a living, you can feel the differences right away. I compared one of the balls from this year to a ball I had sitting at my house from 2016. And they're both used in a game, and you just feel the leather. And one of them is rougher than, the one from 2016 is rougher than the one from this year. MLB seems to think that, you know, they don't really know, at least according to what they say, they don't really know why. But there's a certain bandwidth of acceptable baseballs, that, you know, baseballs they deem as ready for the game. And what they think has happened is as the factory got better at making the baseballs, they've all shifted towards one end of the spectrum, using better leather, a tighter weave, a tighter wrapping of the ball, whatever. And
they're all handmade, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
So as the technicians that are sewing these things together get better at sewing them together, you get better baseballs.
Yeah, and so they think that the overall grouping of baseballs that were used this year were just shifted towards one end of the spectrum on the higher quality side. And that's why smoother leather, tighter weave, harder baseball, flying further. That's what they say.
They need more consistent cows.
Yeah.
That's going to be the end of the video, guys. If you guys enjoy this video, please smash that like button. Subscribe if you're new. And I'm gone.